the Springfield Art Museum, Nick and Sarah and all the staff, and obviously all of the participants who were able to come out and to some, maybe to their surprise or to what they were expecting, work towards making a collective project. So the goal for tonight, just briefly, is to explain a little bit more of what's behind the work. There was the experience itself, and there's the final now form that's here for a couple months that's to be seen. There's other elements to it. There's a kind of a theoretical background. There's some other sort of associated ideas that I want to take this opportunity to illuminate a little bit. So I'm going to just talk briefly about its name, its meaning, the collaboration with Artist Space and how that works out, and also just a little about how we got started with it for those that weren't here, and how 4 hours later we ended up with this finished piece. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the term rhizome. Why is it Rhizomatic Grotto? Why is that important? Anyone that knows me knows I've been using this term for a couple of years and referencing my own work. I had a solo exhibition called Rhizome, and I started identifying with this term rhizome several years back because I was kind of using it metaphorically for my own process and for sort of the way I was working as an artist. And the term itself essentially is a complex rooted network that's usually concealed by an emergent above ground form. So it kind of comes from a botanical world where there's below the surface is a complex interconnected root system or network. What we end up usually experiencing or seeing is a grove of aspen trees or a stand of bamboo, or some other complex, large form. Well, I like this idea quite a bit, this notion that there's another level of organization or complexity that is kind of concealed. So I wanted to really explore the possibility of that kind of complexity being integrated into a methodology of working, some way of making art that could somehow embody or at least be motivated by that. So these images you see floating around are just some of the types of images that are dendritic in nature, or rhizomatic, if you will, or they represent certain levels of complexity that are beyond just one or two steps. So there's a lot of new thinking right now related to interdependency and new ways of thinking about complexity. You could call it the science of complexity or the complexity sciences. Some of those theoretical interests that have emerged from that more recently that influenced me as an artist is emergence, swarm intelligence, network theory, complexity science in general, self-organization, constructal law, biomimicry. Some of these are new terms that have kind of emerged through new ways of thinking about complexity. And those are kind of theoretical frameworks, and that'll get you so far as an artist, but so at some point you got to figure out a way to relate the theoretical components to a practice, some way of making. So it helps me better understand what I'm interested in as an artist, and that's kind of the human culture, culture and society. And in that, I can apply these same processes to some similar, more human interests like cultural anthropology, ethnomusicology, folklore, these kinds of things I'm interested in. Swarm behavior in organisms, evolutionary psychology, mimetic information transmission. These kinds of things are more human and very much related to these theoretical new ways of thinking about complexity. Well, taking this sort of human approach and this theoretical, at some point you want to be able to somehow create some sort of tangible experience, some sort of way to apply it towards what I like to call an emergent methodology for design. So, attempting to do this as an artist as an individual artist is very difficult. You can kind of set up scenarios to where your method sort of has to rely on local decision making or local conditions, and that your expected outcome is not completely determined. So I can kind of set up scenarios, I'll show you a few, to where I'm form finding, I'm creating form, but while doing so, I don't necessarily know exactly what's going to come to be. So there's a lot of removing yourself from the process a little bit. That's kind of difficult for an artist or anyone to do. Some of you guys may have seen that in my work, I take a lot of these issues related to complexity, and I apply it towards culture for sure, and sort of a cultural critique of society, social orders, religion, military, all this kind of stuff into the form of kind of a video art. But I always am wanting to try to apply it towards sculpture, which is what I'm sort of trained as, I guess. So creating form or object, kind of removing, stepping away from the cultural level and trying to get into a way to actually make something that embodies these ideas instead of just critiquing the sort of human evidence of it. So I first started exploring it with students in projects that we would do at Drury. We would start out with a pile of 2x4s or something, and we would go through a process of form finding and experimentation. And what would then happen was, as a group, they would start assembling. And what I started noticing in this process is that they didn't know, neither did I, nor did I know exactly, what was going to happen. But what they were making decisions based on a board-by-board range. So they were making local actions that are very narrow focus to the whole. So we would set up a scenario to where they were, the decision for how to place and where to place and what to do with the next 2x4 was determined, and by and large, by the last placement of the previous 2x4. So they were kind of forced into a situation where they weren't always thinking of the end goal being predetermined, and that every decision they made had to serve this larger picture. Instead, they were really focused in on as a local agent in something more complex. So that role between the local and the global is a key aspect to the theoretical side of these complexity theories. So we would start with these kinds of things, and what would happen is that the resultant form would kind of be a record of all those collective decisions that were being made by the agents, if you will, the students. And then they had a whole new opportunity to reflect on what they had just done, instead of already knowing what it was going to look like and only being surprised that they were able to pull it off. It's a completely different experience from a design standpoint. So these sort of repetitions of pattern and secondary and third order formal layers of complexity came out very natural and very organic, if you will, because it was modeling organic systems. It was modeling biology and evolutionary sort of processes instead of completely deterministic A, B, C level complexity. So this idea that something more could emerge from something very simple was illustrated for the student through practice, and that started giving me hope that this kind of thing could happen in some way in sculpture or art making. So I started recently, I thought, well, I will delve into this as an individual. What can I learn about generative design or something towards an emergent design methodology myself? What can I learn about it? So I set up a scenario to where I studied it with a material until I found that it had a few basic rules of the way it wanted to operate with itself. That would become exponentially more complex as it grew in orders of magnitude, but I still had a basic set of rules that I could operate with, and I didn't know what this would become, but I started with one stick, and the next stick would lead to what I would do with the next one. And I learned quite a bit about the limits of setting local rules and where those local rules might lead before collapse. So in this case, this was set up only using the tension of the members themselves. There's no gluing or any kind of fixative. So it's called Rhizomatic Sincerity, which was kind of using the integral tensions and compression of these individual units to bind themselves together. So I ended up with a complex form that I wasn't exactly sure what it would be, simply by going stick to stick, operating with local rules about tension, compression. So that's all, pretty, I learned something from that, but there's still something missing. An individual, I can't be I made local decisions independently within this one piece, but I'm still a single acting agent. So, I'm still just learning a little bit about something towards an emergent design methodology, but the missing component is you need more agents. You need more minds than one mind applying some sort of method towards something to really start to mimic the sort of local to global complexity. So my research for this semester, for my sabbatical, spoke to this kind of thing quite specifically with regard to taking sculpture and architecture and the shared language between them, and finding using the tension or the relationship between those two to perhaps be a place where an emergent design philosophy or methodology can come to be. So some of the key terms I pulled from that sort of describes exactly what I think we ended up accomplishing here in some cases, and sort of finding a way that these complexity, geometry, emergence can be tested directly in a tangible reality, a form finding and materiality, and not just existing as an idea or being something I do all by myself in some way. So that these gave me some hope that, hey, maybe somehow through collaborating with a group, we can get something at a larger order of magnitude that can better mimic these ideas. So working with Art of Space was a very natural collaboration. Gerard, as soon as Gerard and I started talking when he first came to Springfield, there was clearly a shared interest in a lot of what we were talking about. What it turned out, though, was that a lot of one of his major focus to his research and his interest in creating a group was participation, participatory art. Well, there's a great opportunity there then to apply very related ideas to this notion of pulling together a group and getting them to engage in an art-making process. So I felt that the opportunity there for getting a real collective and communal set of agents would allow for us to see something at a larger scale. So that worked out really well. This guy here, Neil Wilson, is kind of responsible, I think, for a lot of the new ways of thinking about collective behavior. And in his case, he studied ants very closely and kind of helped debunk some of the ongoing myths in our society or culture about the notion of a top-down hierarchy, the idea that there's a queen and that it sets out these commands and that these underlings or peasants follow what the monarchy told it to do. And through his studies of the social behavior of the entire swarm of ants, if you will, the whole colony, we learned that it's actually the opposite. And what we're seeing is that there's a certain set of local rules. And pheromonal information transfer between ants, and it's actually a bottom-up to the point where the individual agents don't see an organized, temperature-controlled, food-managing, ventilated colony. They're seeing local actions. They're seeing a very limited script of possibilities within their language communication. So it really reversed this whole notion of a top-down hierarchy, and this idea that local agents, local actions can create a emergent form that no local agent could have really seen coming necessarily. Man had some idea, but no large-scale picture. So this idea of the collective behavior being a bottom-up process is key to trying to get a emergent methodology to actually work. And with Rhizomatic Grotto, we were able to not only, I think, create a metaphor for this, or for a metaphor for society or community, we actually allowed the coming together, working in the method that we work, to be that, to be community, to be an aspect of society and a contribution to culture. Culture and society, cultural information, and identity, those are emergent phenomena. That's a larger scale component of our local action. So getting art to embody that and be that, not just theoretically suggest it, is key. And I think with this project and with this collaboration, we were able to do that. So